Hey, what's up? It's Phoenix. I hope that you'll check out my videos. I hope that you'll check out my books. I'll put the link to my author page in the description. Hit that like button, subscribe, and share. And thank you for watching. Today, I wanted to philosophize a little bit on something that I find to be troubling me lately, something that I find to be contradictory and problematic from a practical point of view, and even from a philosophical one. And that is the prevalence of contradictions, or I would even describe inconsistencies with the way that things operate in the world. And so it seems to me that one thing that I've been struggling with is that there are many things I used to believe that, due to experiences and thinking about very heavily and reasoning through, I've actually come to almost opposing conclusions. And I actually have some examples. So one example is that I would say that I used to believe a lot in compassion and kindness, and I still do. I think compassion, kindness, respect, generosity, charity, I think these are all good things. I think being empathetic is a great thing. But I've seen the ways in which you could also critique these qualities, these virtues, and you could critique them for a variety of reasons. There's another example where I used to believe very strongly in principles. I used to think that principles were very important, but I've seen the ways in which those principles get undermined and the way that they are, in complex ways, completely undercut. And there's a lot of examples of things like this in my life. And of course, I do believe in general that compassion is a good thing. I do think that principles are important. No matter what example I use, I probably believe the opposing thing because I know what's close to my heart. And I know that I try to be a caring person. I try to be a good person. I care about virtues. But the reason why I'm struggling is because I've looked at it from this opposing perspective of why principles are bad, why empathy and compassion is bad, why the things that we might believe might actually be wrong. And it's very difficult because you find yourself to experience things in the world that contradict what you thought to be true. So for example, I would see myself as someone who for a long time thought compliance was a virtue. I thought it was good to be compliant. But I went through a lot of experiences where I saw people subvert that compliance to their own ends, often with the lack of transparency, usually with the lack of transparency, often undermining me in some way. And I realized I knew maybe from the beginning that compliance wasn't always necessarily good, but you did it because you got things done and it was the way to get things done, and that was just what you were told. But I learned in a very harsh way that you really can't trust people to fulfill the social contract or fulfill their social obligations or do their side of the deal. And so when you realize that you live in a world where there is a lack of transparency, where you yourself might be trying to be transparent, but there's a lack of transparency in the third parties around you, that can be a very complicated thing to have to undergo. And so I use all these examples because, of course, I think in a way you've got to still be a reasonable person. Do your part of the deal. Do what you say you're going to do. Have integrity. Those things matter. But where I'm struggling is I see like the world exists in this contradictory place. It exists in this contradictory state of mind and doesn't do the things that you hope that it will do. And that can be very difficult to have to undergo because of what it shows you about the way that the world is. When you believe that transparency is important and so you do your best to be transparent, even though that's a harder virtue and value to live up to, you really struggle. And you struggle because you're seeing that the opposite tendencies are actually being upheld. You're actually seeing that people aren't transparent. You're actually seeing that the systems aren't transparent, that the things you're told and promised don't exist at all. Now, of course, I know the counter arguments to what I'm saying. Of course, compliance is something that many people actually very strongly disagree with, and I understand why. And of course, I could argue for that. Of course, there are political perspective which range from more left-wing anarchist positions, which often attribute this idea that there is no authority, and so that's there as well. What's interesting to me, as someone who appreciates philosophical reasoning and someone who appreciates reasoning on abstract issues and thinking about these things in a deep way, is that I've learned that to a degree I have to be able to think in a contradictory way about things. And I've noticed that I free myself when I allow myself to be more contradictory in my approach. So it's not to muddy the waters. It's not to obfuscate. It's not to confuse or disorient. I know that there are a lot of things that I agree with and that I know are going to be a harder route to have to take. I know it's going to be more difficult to do, but I do those things because I believe that to be the right thing to do. I just naturally am going to take the high road because I believe that that's the right thing to do. It doesn't matter what I go through, I try to stick with those values and virtues nonetheless. But I've noticed in a true dialectical fashion that I've had to look at the opposing views. So what would be the reason to not be always compassionate or empathetic? Well, there are reasons. You don't want to get taken advantage of. You don't want to get hurt in any way. You want to take care of the people around you to the best of your abilities. You can't take care of the whole world. The point is there's so many arguments that you can make to show why some of these conclusions are actually flawed. And you could do this with any example. And that's what I've been doing a little bit more recently, is really looking at the other side. I've been doing it in my essay writing because I've been looking at the opposing perspective, or the perspective that I don't want to engage with, but that I know that I need to if I'm going to be thorough on my approach. But the point is, you look at these things and you realize that there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more going on. And so you have to be able to look at it from a contradictory perspective. You have to be able to see it in a dialectical fashion. And none of this is easy. None of this even always makes sense. When you find yourself to be contradicted over and over again, despite trying to uphold your values and do your best, that's a very disorienting place to be. And that can be a crushing place to be. But I feel like we end up in those places because in a very weird way, many people go through life believing very strongly one thing or two things or three things, and they believe those things very strongly, only for later in life to go to the opposite perspective, to go to the opposite conclusion. And this is a very difficult truth. This is a thing that I don't think is easy to recognize and know what to do with, except for the fact that we will be contradicted by life, by the people around us, by circumstances, by institutions, by principles, by ideas. We will be contradicted. And even when we see ourselves as having a dialectical understanding of the world, as having more than just black and white thinking, as having this ability to look at things from a variety of perspectives, we still find ourselves to be contradicted. We still find ourselves to be confused. And that can be a very, I would say, terrible place to be. But I think it's a place that we all end up in some ways, and we just have to be honest about that happening. So yeah, it's not pleasant, but it's definitely something I've been thinking about. So yeah, I'm Phoenix. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. It's definitely something I've been thinking about and something I've been interested in. It's definitely come out in my writing quite a bit, and it's definitely coming out in my thinking and my approach to life. And I am disturbed by it and troubled by it, but I recognize that it's there, and I recognize that it's a part of life. And so I'm just trying to do my best. And that's all anyone can really do. So yeah, thank you for watching. Again, I hope you'll check out my other videos. I hope you'll check out my books. And thank you for being here. I appreciate it, and I will see you soon.